Welcome to the France 24 debate. 7 years since the uprising that saw a wind of change blow across North Africa. The Arab Spring began with the exit of Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali in Tunisia. 9 governments later, there seems to be no answer to the problems that led to the rise of anger and action that saw Ben Ali kicked out of power. The people who've been protesting in the streets across Tunisia for the past week are essentially complaining about the same things. It boils down to no jobs, no money, no future. A steep rise in the cost of living and a hike in taxes pushed everyone over the edge. This time, looking across the region, looking at how things have gone since the overthrow of the so-called strongmen, the likes of Gaddafi, Ben Ali, Mubarak, you might be forgiven for thinking, well, it might have been better if things had remained the way they were. Some people, of course, have a completely different opinion. Has the opportunity to create a new Arab world been lost? Can the optimism of 2011 be born again? Our guests to discuss this are Roula Jebrial, visiting professor at the University of Miami. Roula is also an author. She teaches at the University of Rome. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
On the other side of our studio, Mohammed Al-Alawi, president of the Syria charity, and a regular visitor to these shores. Thanks for being with us once again.
Thank you.
Julien Deron is lecturer in international conflicts at Sciences Po. Thank you, Julien, for joining us. And last but definitely not least, Basha El Halabi, who is a journalist here at France 24. Great to see you. I pass you in the corridor all the time. Lebanese journalist who writes for France 24's Arabic website. First, though, let's look at the recent protests in Tunisia.
Tunis's city center, a sea of red and white. Hundreds of protesters of all ages, genders, and political backgrounds flooded Avenue Bourguiba on Sunday. Chanting against poverty and hunger, they vowed to take their country back from what they call thieves.
I'm oppressed. I'm hungry. I have problems. But I am also a son of Tunisia, and we must protect our country.
Many here feel betrayed by the 9 governments that followed the 2011 revolution. They do not see the social and economic strides that were promised to them. Work, freedom, dignity. Some chant the same slogans as 7 years ago. For many of them, the revolution has failed.
7 years after the revolution, our goals have not been achieved. We're here to say that we will keep on fighting until these promises are fulfilled.
Sunday's march caps a week of demonstrations against a series of austerity measures and tax hikes that took effect in the new year. The 2018 finance law raised prices amid complaints that the cost of living was already too high. Near the city limits, where violent clashes broke out between youth and police earlier in the week, President Beji Caïd Essebsi inaugurated a cultural center dedicated to young people.
The revolution was led by young people. But I ask you to be patient, to think of the common interest and have humility. Your nation does not have a lot of means, but it has resilient people.
On Saturday, Essebsi announced an increase in aid to the needy and improved health care to quell the unrest. The 2018 finance law is part of a series of promised reforms in exchange for a €2 billion loan from the IMF to help boost Tunisia's faltering economy, hurt by falling tourism.
One can't help but think if you'd announced that aid at the same time as you announced the tax rises and the price rises on January the 1st, we wouldn't be in this mess right now. 7 years ago, I was here when Ben Ali gave a very shaky speech, and then he was gone. And now it seems things really haven't changed for the majority of people, not just in Tunisia, but across all the countries that saw that change come through. Let's bring in the guests. Enough from me. Roula, can I start with you? What is your feeling when you see that report, when you see what's gone on? How do you feel about what's been happening?
Actually, Tunisia is the shining example of the Arab Spring. We had an Islamist party that negotiated with seculars. They drafted the best constitution they could come up with, and the international community abandoned them. What were the requests of the Arab Spring? What happened in Egypt? We had a coup, basically, by a thug and a tyrant called Sisi, who killed in the streets thousands of people, took power. What did he do? There's more corruption in Egypt today than ever. There's more oppression. A girl was killed in the street for holding flowers a year ago. What we see in Tunisia, actually, we see people protesting peacefully. Yes, sometimes there are clashes, but we don't see what we see in Syria, where you have barrel bombs, we have people basically being killed from home to home, where the regime is using even food to starve their own people. Yes, It's not perfect. It's not great. But you know what? Today is also the day of Martin Luther King. Today is the day where a black man marched and forced America to address the race issue. What did he say? He said, the arch of history is long. It goes forward, sideways, and backwards, but always bends toward justice. The Arab people are asking three things. It's what your people in this country demanded after the revolution: democracy, dignity, and freedom. But we need to support them. We know that there's Arab regimes, Saudi Arabia, the Emiratis, who are the counter-revolutionaries, who are pumping billions of dollars in what? Oppressive police states around the Middle East. This is what we're seeing.
Rula, thank you. Feel free to join in at any time, gentlemen. Don't wait for me to invite you. But I'll bring you in first, Mohammed, about the situation. Rula's talked about the situation in Syria, clearly close to your heart.
Yes, exactly. We are facing now new challenges, and I will speak from a humanitarian aspect. Now, NGOs can bring some kind of solution in these countries. We have two different countries where the war ended, or there were not such significant killings like Tunisia. And there, what is needed is to support economy. And NGOs can have some kind of answer. They can support economy, create development projects that will create also jobs, new jobs. In Syria, we have a complete different situation. From a humanitarian aspect, we have completely besieged areas. We have also areas that are under bombing, under constant bombing. The bombing are almost never ending. And now the whole humanitarian processes just broke, because usually humanitarian NGOs are just coming from outside with expatriate, and they are driving and bringing experience. Here it is not possible because no one can get in or out. And there, this situation that was after the Arab Spring in Syria, in Yemen, also in Libya, it is a complete new challenge for humanitarian NGOs, and now we have to rely on local people. They are the future of these countries, and we are in an emergency carrying project.
And on the brink of another emergency in Idlib, as state troops begin to muster together, backed by their Russian allies, to push in and take that from the rebels.
It's preposterous that Lavrov, when he started the conversation talking about American foreign policy, believe me, it's so hard to defend American foreign policy in this moment while they are supporting Mohammed bin Salman, bombing and starving people in Yemen, while this crown prince is buying chateaus and Da Vinci's and seeing people in Tunisia and elsewhere starving, and in Yemen. He's the cause of a humanitarian catastrophe. However, we have the hypocrisy of the West. Your country sell weapons, America give intel information, and then Russia is actually backing the regime of Bashar al-Assad. So I don't want to be lectured by any of these governments about, oh, you Arab people, stand up and do your own work, when you actually actively are endorsing these regimes and these governments. Yes, you're right. We need to stand up on our own because we are alone in this as Arab people.
Go on, Basha.
I have a couple of probably comments where I disagree with Ms. Jabril. First off, I wouldn't call Tunisia at the moment the shining star of the Arab revolutions. It is definitely a success story. However, it's not as of yet a complete democracy, if there's something like that. And it's not as of yet, it did not reach the aspirations of the people over there. Another issue which I really would like to stress on is accusing the West about part of our failures. Definitely they are held responsible. There's a huge responsibility on them. However, we are also held responsible for a lot of our failures. And talking about that, the Tunisian people need to understand the rights, the reason they are protesting is definitely legitimate. They have the right to say that the economic grievances, the political stagnation has marred their lives for the past 7 years. However, Tunisian people at the moment are protesting freely in the streets of Tunis.
And that's a success I'm talking about.
Yes, exactly.
So I said the difference between Bashar al-Assad.
Let me continue.
No,
before talking about
before talking about when you talk about Bashar al-Assad and Tunis, there's a huge stark
difference.
I'm
not talking. I didn't mention Bashar al-Assad.
That's a success I'm talking about.
Of course.
Between slaughtering your own people and allowing them to protest peacefully.
However, there's an important point where people held put a huge bar, they set the bar extremely so high in terms of regime change in different areas of the Arab world. However, the Arab world, as of today, doesn't look at all like the Arab world in 2011. Police states maybe have changed, the regimes have fallen, but people have changed. The mentality has changed among a lot of people, especially among the youth, people like me, people who took the streets and who still have a lot of future waiting for them in the coming years, and they know that change is incremental. They should understand that change is incremental, and it happens as if with time. So 7 years is a really small period in the time of a revolution and its success to actually judge it.
And let's remind people, you come from a country with Syria on the doorstep, with the problems there perhaps about to move over the border. You have this constant fear in Lebanon, don't you?
Yes, of course. And in my country as well, you have a political establishment who is making use of the counter-revolutionary movement that has marred the Arab world and is trying to re-establish itself either through its sons and daughters by inheriting their own political positions in the government, in the parliament, etc., or through different alliances, business alliances that is going to re-establish the elite in the country.
Basha, thank you. I need to stop you there. Julian, can I bring you in, please? Now, obviously, rulers saying that the West has let these states down, and there is a point there, I'm sure. The US still funds Egypt to a degree. Clearly, that goes on. What do you see as this kind of balance or imbalance that we're exposing here?
If I might take the big picture, we have several scenarios across the North Africa and the Middle East too. Tunisia is probably like the least worst example we have, actually. So I kind of agree with you, meaning that it's the best we have, but it's not much, actually. And the peaceful protest today that we experience today is actually a good witness of the exact claims that we had 7 years ago. So in a way, it's a failure, but it's not that a failure regarding to what exists elsewhere. So, I mean, still peaceful demonstrations and a regime that still tries to understand the claim of the people.
Even here in Paris, people are protesting against Macron for the same reasons. So
exactly.
Yeah, that don't get slaughtered. Yeah. That's a huge success for the Middle East.
I'm not completely sure that the situation in Tunisia can be compared to the situation in France.
No, definitely not. I'm saying there are similar reasons.
Yeah, true. So that's actually the closest that we might have from social democracy, actually. There's other countries where it was a restoration of kinds of regime that we had before. The example of Egypt, worst or better, I don't know, it might be arguable, but kind of the same regime. And in different countries, the situation is not decided yet. Libya, Yemen, Syria, it was actually still pending. And the problem with that is that the most radical forces, whatever it's about political dictator or Islamic forces, jumped in and tried to get their own political agenda. And in Syria, it's actually what they did. We were speaking about Idlib. True, they're facing a regime offensive now, and on the other side, there's HTS. I mean, it's rather not Al-Qaeda-oriented, but at least Salafi-led alliance with Turkey behind. I mean, when I say behind, I say geographically behind Idlib. Meaning that the democratic forces in Syria still do exist. I completely agree with you, Bashar, saying that mentality changed across Middle East and North Africa. People have completely changed their minds, but sometimes they also change 2 times. I remember last year talking to a Tunisian in Tunis, tell me that he was a fervent supporter of the revolution, but that regarding to the small advance that he experienced, that he kind of preferred the time before. So that's a problem. Regarding to your precise question, the international community, I would rather speak about the international community more than the West, because the West, it's not like the 18th or the 20th century. The West is not responsible for the whole region or something like that. The real masters of the Middle East now are Russia and Iran. It's true that the West is responsible in a way because we did not put the sufficient means to back the real democratization and development of the region.
So when there was the red line in Syria, Obama didn't act, but Putin's been acting all along.
That's way before. What John Kennedy used to say is when you don't back a non-violent revolution, the violent revolution will take place. You are so right about this. And you know what? We actually let the Syrian people and the Arab masses go to the streets. Then we saw the slaughtering. The slaughterhouse started in Syria, the butchery, the barrel bombs. But there was a moment, I want to remind everybody, where actually the regime was almost losing. Then he starts saying, I'm losing territory, and Putin came to his aid, and the militias from Iran and Hezbollah and others and they turn the things around. The ruler of the Middle East today, as we speak, is Putin.
And I think that the regime itself was pretty surprised of the West's limited action.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't say inaction, but limited action.
And what stopped what stopped, and I live in the United States, in that period of time, I was talking a lot to the Obama administration and his people. They were looking at what happened after the Iraq war that destabilized the Middle East. Let's be clear. 2003, that invasion absolutely destabilized the Middle East. And from there, but the Arab people, the masses that protested, are still there. They were real people, and they will go back. Look at Egypt. We think that these Arab regime who suppress their own people, they suppress the revolution forever. They are delusional if they are thinking that. Because these people, the problems of Tunisia are multiplied for 10 in Egypt, in Libya, in other places. Egypt is, for example, the population growth rate is 3%. The unemployment, if you look at the unemployment in the Arab world, is skyrocketing.
Over 25%.
If you look also on another data, which is really the most important one, the youth. 70% are under 30. If you look at these numbers, here you have the next revolution in the making. Plus, you have 40,000 people in jail as we speak in Egypt. The next jihadists will come from those oppressive states.
We need to, can I just pause you all? We need to go for a break now. Mohammed, you're the first voice back in part two. Stay with us here on the France 24 debate. More to come.
Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
In 1976, 10 years after seizing power in the Central African Republic, President Bokassa proclaimed himself emperor. 14 years of bloodthirsty dictatorship later, France put an end to his reign. But the country has struggled ever since to establish good governance. In the face of interreligious massacres and a choice between exile or a ruined economy, some have begun to regret the passing of Bokassa's regime.
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com. The Observer's Direct.
Ici en Tunisie, sur le mont Semama, notre observateur Adnan Hilali initie des jeunes à différentes activités artistiques. C'est une façon pour lui de lutter contre leur envie d'émigrer vers l'Europe, alors qu'aujourd'hui, la Tunisie fait face à une vague de départs clandestins vers le vieux continent sans précédent depuis la révolution de 2011. Nous irons à la rencontre de ces jeunes et de leurs rêves d'Europe qu'ils imaginent parfois en véritable paradis.
The Observer's Direct on France 24 and France24.com. France in Focus, presented by Tom Burgess-Watson.
The must-see program to understand France, its history and culture. An original look at French society and topical themes, revealing just what makes France and the French so unique.
France in Focus on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back here in the studio. The debate continues. Let's give you the headlines before we take it up in earnest. The main story, a Palestinian teenage girl is in an Israeli military court for slapping a soldier. Ahmed Tamimi's case has fired up anger across the Palestinian territories. She's been detained for another 2 days before they decide the fate of her trial. At least 38 people have been killed in a double suicide attack in Baghdad. A busy central square was the target. Iraq is calling for the elimination of jihadist sleeper cells. The G5 Sahel meets in Paris to decide the next stage of the unified fight against Islamist terror across that desert region of North Africa. Welcome back to part two of the France 24 debate. Has the promise and the optimism of the Arab Spring been lost forever? The protests in Tunisia all last week and up to this weekend, 7th anniversary of the overthrow of the then Tunisian strongman President Ben Ali, basically an elected dictator. People worn down by a lack of jobs, lack of opportunities, corruption, poor treatment. Back then they decided they'd had enough. But the complaints of the protesters in Tunisia last week now show that perhaps little seems to have changed in their lives. Our guests to discuss this and the wider picture across the Arab world are Roula Jibril, visiting professor, University of Miami. Roula, an author, also teaches at the University of Rome. Thank you very much for being with us. Mohammed al-Alwayi, Yes, is president of Syria Charity, and I'm sorry I stumbled over your name, sir. No Julien Theron is lecturer in international conflicts at Sciences Po. Thank you, sir, for being with us. And last but definitely not least, Basha Al-Halabi, journalist at France 24. Great to see you. Yeah. Now, before we let these fall loose again, let's take a listen to the leader of the Tunisian League for the Defense of Human Rights.
Unemployment and marginalisation are still rising, in addition to the absence of state investment in this city and false promises. But this does not change the fact that in Sidi Bouzid, like in other Tunisian cities, there has been an important shift in the field of rights and freedoms, both individual and public, which is not insignificant.
So it's relevant, but it's not as good as people would like it to be. People still unhappy. We'll explore more about Tunisia. We haven't spoken about Libya much yet, too. We'll be on to that in a moment. Before we move on, though, from discussing Syria as we ended the first part, I'll bring in Mohammed Al-Alawi to talk about that situation. What was the point you wanted to make, sir?
Yes, we were speaking about radicalism present in Syria. But the question is, why is there radicalism? Well, there is radicalism because there was slaughter. There was slaughter for more than 6 years. We have a generation of orphans, more than 800,000 orphans. They have lost their parents, they have lost their home.
800,000
Yes,
orphans.
more than 800,000. And they have lost their home, they have lost their parents, they have lost everything. And on top of that, there is no education, there is no school. NGOs like Syria Charity are just crying for help to create schools, and we are able to do that. For instance, we have schools inside Ghouta. As I'm speaking now, there is a school sponsored by Syria Charity inside Ghouta in very hard-to-reach area. The thing is...
You're talking about setting up schools in the middle of places that have been destroyed.
Yes, it is.
It seems unthinkable.
And still bombed, yeah. They are still dying, but we still need to help these children. Even in this kind of situation, they need to have access to education, because education will be the only help. It will prevent them from radicalism. When you're educating them, you are helping them, you are preparing this generation. And if you're not doing that, the point is, the last thing, if you're not doing that, we have a whole generation, not only in Syria, in Yemen. This will be a huge challenge, and if we're not doing that, we will be seeing a whole generation in a few decades that will be coming with more violence, with more hatred, and it is now, if we want to bring a better future, we have to bring now, and especially in education.
Well, but fine words. Basha?
I'm going to tell you where the Arab Spring actually succeeded. Before 2011, there was the myth of authoritarian regimes, and it was unshakable. No one actually dared to contest that. After 2011, this myth was shattered. Nowadays, strongmen like Abdel Fattah al-Sisi are terrified living in their palaces, knowing that as soon as 2-3 people get together, they have to arrest them, because you never know what might lead to that. Public spaces, they're all eradicated in Egypt. Today actually is the 7th anniversary of the call for Khalid Said to mobilize. Remember that in Egypt. So the culture is there, the mentality is there. Right now, people running for elections against Sisi, they definitely do not represent, at least the ones that withdrew, do not represent the aspirations of the young generation. However, with time, it's going to change, and Sisi knows that. And I hope we can build on this later on.
So the strong man on borrowed time is the message I'm getting from you, Basha. Thank you. Julien?
I think that what we've heard previously is right. The Tunisian people, and actually all the Arab people, are pretty resilient. And I think that's the right word. I worked with the psychologist in Lebanon, Michel Marajal, who deals with the Syrian refugees in Lebanon and in places where the Lebanese themselves are pretty poor. So they see poor population because they are refugees. They might be really educated and so on, but they are refugees, so they don't have a lot of means. Welcoming other people from another country torn by war in a very sensible, confessional, sectarian situation. And it goes well. And you see kids going to school with the Lebanese with a smile. And I've also seen some refugees or IDPs.
Excuse me, Julian, in Lebanon, it's not all rainbows and butterflies. We have a lot of racist people in the country who have spoken a lot against
where I'm going to, actually. And I've seen some things like that also in northern Iraq, where people have nothing, and they are actually patient, resilient, and they wait. Look at these peaceful demonstrations. People just claim peacefully their claims. And it was the case in Syria at the beginning as well. For month and month and month, people were saying, we are bombed. The regime fires at us, and you don't do anything. We don't want to radicalize. We don't want to form non-state armed groups. But be careful, because I remember the time where we started to hear the first calls of jihad. And they were saying that, the population saying like, be careful, they're coming. And they actually came. And the international community, not only the West, the international community, because the emerging countries do not care. Because China doesn't want to move a little bit now for security issues because of Uyghur population that went to ISIS. But I mean, it's an international situation. And it's true. So regarding to these situations and this great resilience, some did not. A small minority, but finally some got so angry because it's very hard to see your house bombed and, I don't know, your partner in life being cut in two and your kids being tortured. It's very hard to see that. So some actually radicalized. But we didn't, what the real problem at the bottom of the line is governance. We didn't find the proper governance and install the proper governance in these countries that meet the will of the peoples. That's the problem. That's the reason why we are here still 7 years after, because we didn't solve the governance issue.
I really have a problem issue with saying install because honestly, it really gives me, because guess what? Every time the international community, I understand. No, I did not accuse you of that.
We as the world, I mean,
okay,
really,
the international
not the West
community
at all. It's not
decided after Bosnia with Bill Clinton that there is a United Nations resolution called responsibility to protect.
No.
We have
read my works, you're going to see I'm bottom to top
I have no doubt.
Promoter.
However, as a person, and I agree with you regarding education, I'm proud to be a professor at Miami University and at American University. We have a scholarship program for Syrian women. Because they are the most targeted, and Syrian refugees especially. What's happening towards the refugees is a travesty, and it's shameful that some of our rich countries are abandoning them, especially the Gulf, that claim that they care. But remember also, the jihadists, how do they rise? And this is the narrative that does not exist in the West unless people like us, minority who actually came from the ground, say this story. And the story is simple. Radicalization doesn't rise in vacuum. Who are all the radical groups that came to Syria? There was a project. There was 2 rooms. And it's documented in the United States. And because of the crisis in the Gulf, we discovered actually which 2 rooms were. The United States decided, okay, the Free Syrian Army, we have to select some of them. We have to train some of them. We will have to put red for hardcore jihadists and green. And then we had people like Allouche and others. They were financed by our Gulf countries, and the 2 rooms that were used, Jordan and Turkey, to finance the opposition that happened to be jihadists. But we did not intervene when that protest was a peaceful protest, when actually this dictator was slaughtering children. Remember the name of Hamza al-Khatib, 13 years old from Daraa. He was tortured, he was burned, and he was shot with 3 bullets to the head. 13 years old. Not only him. Yeah. In the same time while he was doing this, let me just finish, please. In that moment when Bashar al-Assad was doing that, he was releasing jihadists. That was the accusation. 2006, during the Iraq War, the United States State Department with Colin Powell accused Bashar al-Assad of releasing jihadists, send them to fight in Iraq. He did the same strategy. He understood that the West would be terrified of jihadists. He released them. He basically he bombed the pro-democracy activists, let the jihadists thrive for a while, because the real threat were not those jihadists. He hid behind that. That was his survival strategy. We need to remember these facts, because our people who will choose who they want, who will elect. Democracy is about electing not what we want, not installment, but who they want. We need to respect these principles.
Some people said when the Arab Spring happened that these countries, and I found this really patronizing, but you guys know more than me, these countries aren't ready for democracy.
That's an offensive remark. And honestly, it's
Some
like
people
saying
said that.
black people are not ready. People ran a campaign with this president in the United States. It's racist, it's condescending, and it's unacceptable in the 21st century. You know why? For 3-4 reasons. We have a president in America that ran a campaign for 5 years saying that Barack Obama was a Muslim fear and paranoia and fear, and they always looked at the others, and the others can be Jews in Europe. Remember, these are the same arguments were used before the Holocaust. They were used in Bosnia, and they are used now against the Arab people. Not only we're ready, we want freedom.
It can
we want
actually
democracy
be used,
and freedom.
it can be contradicted and say after the American people voting for Trump that probably that's a joke as well.
I was going to joke by saying, in the UK people voted for Brexit without knowing what the heck they were voting for.
Austria.
Fear.
And
Fear is the biggest weapon
and a load of
in
lies.
politics.
That was it. But obviously,
Fear is the biggest weapon in politics. When they fail to formulate an economic prosperity plan or a vision, what they go to? Fear of minorities, fear of Jews, fears of Muslims, fears of black people. This is what they use. It's the biggest weapon, sadly, in this moment in our politics.
So has Tunisia...
I want to make only about Putin, because it's true that Putin right now is calling the shots to a certain extent in the Arab world. However, what happened a couple of days back in Hmaymim, in the Russian airbase over there, actually raises a lot of questions and opens up new doors for the coming period, with Sochi discussions failing, with Geneva talks failing. So I wouldn't go as far as calling Putin the guy in charge of the Middle East at the moment. He's not.
He's the person who's been the most consistent, I suppose, when you look at the people on the outside.
I'd say they are the Iranians.
The Iranians.
When Vladimir Putin wanted to arrange himself with Turkey in Astana a year ago or something like that, the Iranians, with the regime, they organized an offensive to show to Moscow that they are in charge. And actually... this situation in Iraq, in Syria and until Lebanon shows that the organization of Shia non-state armed groups throughout the region makes them responsible. They have different assets. Russia is about the Security Council, diplomacy, the relations with the West, and the grand jeu, this organization of all the state actors and so on. They don't have a lot of men on the ground. We speak about special forces, military companies, and some protection forces for their airports and naval bases. But that's all. The ground is militias all over the Middle East, which is completely different from the North Africa, actually. Yeah. Even Libya is pretty different. But they're organized. We speak about feudalization of Syria, because this is a part also of the things didn't change. Because we see the regime against the revolution. First, there's different revolutions. There's a democratic revolutions, and even inside the revolution where there are jihadi Salafi group like Jabhat al-Nusra, when they seized power, sometimes there was demonstration against the jihadi, saying like, okay, you seized our territory, but we rule the politics because we are a local democracy and we organize that.
Which means
and
that
it's exactly the same.
Vibrant people, and they still deserve a chance.
Yeah,
everybody
and it's exactly the same in pro-regime places where some militia rule and people organize, meaning that it's not at all the return to ex-ante situation over there, but it's a share and an experience of a taste of local democracy, even in very harsh situations, even in the schools, under the bombing, in your basement, when you organize a class of 1 hour with your kids, it's already an experience, I think, that you take your destiny in your hands.
Let me just throw something else up in the air and see how your reaction lands. Some people say Libya would have been better off if Gaddafi was still in charge.
No.
That's what some people say. That's what some people say.
Let
me pause you, Rila.
Please.
Over here, where I would actually agree with Mrs. Jibril or Ms. Jibril in regards to the Western intervention, because the moment Gaddafi was ousted from power, everyone left Libya. Everyone deserted Libya. They deserted the military groups over there, the civilized movement over the civilian movement over there, and all that. So, and at that exact point in time, people really didn't know how to restructure the country, given there was an eradication of the political and social life for 40 years under Gaddafi.
And the militia kept the arms. Remember, World War II. What was this? After the Allies basically liberated Europe, what happened? There was a Marshall Plan that took over. basically taking away the militias, arms, and whatever. This is what we did in Bosnia. This was what happened basic in the Balkans. They intervened, liberated the area. There was a political process, and then demilitarization of all the militias. In Libya, President Obama did not want to go.
Institution buildings.
Exactly, state buildings.
This comes back to your first point about the West letting them down.
Obama did not want to go. The truth is the president of your country, Sarkozy, for very suspicious reason, with all due respect, that we still don't know of, and I suspect they are very related to money and corruption, and I hope this state will investigate, because we need justice when it comes to these issues. And Cameron, they really wanted to go into that war. They pushed President Obama. It was clear from Clinton's book that he did not want to go. They went in, and they went out immediately after they secured their strategic assets and their revenues for oil and others. Guess what? Who's in charge of today? Libya is a broken state. Yeah. The militias are in control, and there's multiple militias, and there's multiple Libyas. It's not one area, not one man, and not one control.
And obviously a country which has immense wealth, potential, the chance to maybe set up its own structure and do things, and it's all going...
The only interest in Libya at the moment is in regards to the refugees. After the scandal that went out,
and again, that's because it impacts
exactly
us.
Europe.
It impacts Europe. That's it. You know.
Exactly.
So
now they are selling slaves, black slaves, market slaves in certain areas, and the Italian government, and it's my government. Obviously, I'm also an Italian citizen. It pains me to see that the government, with Minister of Interior Minniti, goes there, pays those warlords so the refugees would not come to European shores. It's really. Is this who we are as Europeans? Are these our values?
The Italians were just training the Coast Guard. It's actually beyond that.
They are paying warlords so the refugees would not come to European shores. Guess what? Honestly, Europeans need to come together to understand what their immigration policy towards and attitude toward refugees. Are we going to uphold our values, or we are going to pay these warlords?
What is pretty strange is that we know how to do it.
Exactly.
We did it from top down. I completely agree in the Balkans, but at the end of the 90s we were completely bored with the 4 wars, so we wanted to deal with that, and the US too, by the way. But still, we managed to not even get the dictator out, because it's the Serbs themselves who took Milosevic out with the Otpor movement, but we limited the offensive on Kosovo. Then we stabilized the country with military forces, then with the peacekeeping forces, then we helped them to build institutions, especially in countries like Macedonia. In Macedonia, we even prevented civil war. We know how to do it. But it needs some political will. And leaders in the West, or not in the West, by the way, they don't want, but in the West, they usually are a little bit, not, I wouldn't say afraid, but reluctant to do that, because it doesn't pay politically. Because
exactly.
Let's be clear, your population doesn't want us to pay billions and billions of euros for whatever the situation is in some countries, even if irrationally, at the end of the day, it asks the question of migration with a terrible drama.
Guess what? You will end up paying by far much more. Prevention of radicalization, terrorism, security, refugees. And you know what? Sorry to say that. And even when it comes to climate change, because we did not cultivate the lands, whether it's Syria, Libya, and there, you have the masses of drought and climate. It's really changing everything. The prices of food, of water, of oil. If you really want to have a long-term strategy and vision, you have to explain to your population, not that, you know, what orange hair is Donald Trump is. You need to, or if President Obama was born here or there. What you need to explain, we have a visionary leader, and really there's a lack of leadership everywhere around the globe. We need to explain to our population what are the risks in the short term, in the long term, and make them to understand that whatever sacrifices in terms of economy, and we need to have private sector become very active in these countries, because they're already active. Who are the biggest beneficiary of these wars? Arms dealers, basically, and traffickers, sex traffickers and refugee traffickers.
Regional hegemons, I would add.
Yes.
I mean, the 3 big actors in the Middle East now are Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Turkey. Egypt's trying to get some room there. And that's it. And that's it.
We need a process of reconciliation for the Middle East. whether these countries...
Before the reconciliation, because you guys talked about the Balkans, maybe the international community can consider some sort of justice in terms of taking the people who are perpetrators to justice in Syria and other places.
And I think this is why the UN...
Yes. Mohammed, is that what's needed, bringing people to justice, that kind of reconciliation?
Of course, before considering reconciliation, the first thing is that the bomb need to stop, the war need to stop, especially in Syria, especially in Yemen. And then what I'm saying is I don't want the Arab world to have something like the World War II with 40 million people dying before even considering thinking about reconciliation. Look at what the Europeans have done. They have slaughtered each other for decades, and then they just woke up saying, okay, if we're continuing this, we are going to just eradicate each other. Now we need to build something strong. With the default of the European Union, I hope, I am dreaming about something like that to happen in the Arab world, and it will bring stability to the whole world, because this region is considering a lot of war, lots of conflict, lots of unsatisfaction. But my dream is to have this being, and if possible, not having millions of dead before coming to that.
Mohammed has a dream. Can it come true?
But it should happened in Europe. Hope. Actually, because the two biggest political radicalized ideologies, communism and Nazism, even more, but some connected, collapsed because they had no support anymore. Nazism and communism collapsed by itself. In the Middle East, radical ideologies have good days in front of them. They feed each other. It's the kind of normal. Even in Lebanon, if you watch, which is surprisingly stable regarding to
they are fed by injustice. Injustice is feeding them.
The political speech is completely about conspiracy, and the reason of the failure of the country because of the others, always.
The truth, can I add, regarding war too, and since we are analysing, sometimes in war, and sadly, and I say this with great sadness, we have to have a clear vision. When Americans decided to enter the war, and they looked at the reality, they had two monsters to face, communism at one end and Nazism. But they understood that Nazism was the biggest monster. So they allied themselves, basically, with the communists. They know who they were dealing with. They know the oppressive ideology, whatever. Americans understood that they have to come to terms with that kind of alliances and defeat the Nazis. This is what happened. I'm not saying that tomorrow we'll see Saudi Arabia, which we have two big actors in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia and Iran. Within that two-power struggle, we are crushed and killed and slaughtered because one back one regime and the other back the other regime, and we are in the middle.
But applying that to Syria,
it's time that our
international
friends and backers understand that this game needs to end for order for these threats to be prevented.
Indeed, I was going to say, applying that logic to Syria, it's why Bashar al-Assad is now part of the final equation.
He's playing on that.
Previous people were saying, no, we've got to get rid of him. No, he'll stay now, won't he?
He's playing on that.
He will stay for the meanwhile. Let's be clear. Putin will throw him under the bus when the opportunity will open up. If you look at the Arab regimes. True. The Americans, Mubarak thought he was the best friend of the Americans. Look what happened to him. Saddam Hussein thought that thing. Arab regime, we need to wake up and understand the delusion they are living in.
Let me pause
they will throw them under the bus when it comes to
final words. Will Tunisia go forward? Will Tunisia succeed? We started with Tunisia, let's end with Tunisia. Will it succeed? Will it go forward? Pasha.
The main point right now for the Tunisians is actually to go to the local elections that have been being postponed for a while now, and after that go to a new parliamentary elections and form new coalitions in the parliament.
Julian?
Well, it has to receive international support, but the announces of social reforms, the dialogue and most of all the behavior of the population are good signs. So let's hope for that because it's the best we have.
Mohammed? Tunisia, will Tunisia succeed? Can Tunisia go forward?
I think so. I think that Tunisia can succeed, but we have to just bring the means, and not only in Tunisia. If Tunisia was able to succeed, it will be just an example for all the other countries, and that it is a huge challenge. I hope so.
Here we go. Final word to you, Rula.
I hope and I truly pray that it will succeed with international aid, no doubt, with people who have vision. I don't think politicians, and you're right, they are too weak. and they are too vulnerable to the next election. They're thinking about the next election, but we need to have visionary people like Jeff Bezos, like these entrepreneurs, these businessmen who are even in France, in any country, go to Tunisia, invest, create jobs, because we need you for ourselves, but you need
but before the
to
investment,
stabilize.
we need the stability, don't they?
Of course, of course.
Listen,
you need to build the
they
state.
go hand by hand. The state is there. The next election are there. This is the best country actually to do business and to invest. And I just want to tell you something. We are building a lot of armies, and this is what countries are investing in. We need to build actually citizens. That's what Tunisia needs.
Rula, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all the guests here for this very lively debate where I think we've worked out that the Arab world does have hope, does have enthusiasm and talent, and is ready for democracy. You put us right on that one clearly. And obviously we're hoping that things will start to move in the right direction. But as we've heard here today, many things did happen before that can come about.
I wish we have these kind of debates in America. Thank you for having all of us. It was the most interesting civilized debate I participated in a year time since the election.
You can invite us to America
and we didn't pay her to say that at all.
France 24.
Thank you very much, Rula. That's very kind of you. Thank you all for watching too. Thanks to our guests. This has been the France 24 debate. Stay with us.